We would now like to introduce Dr. David Rooney, sir. A profound wisdom researcher, Dr. David Rooney is a professor of management and organizational studies at the Department of Marketing and Management, Faculty of Business and Economics at Macquarie University, Australia. His research focuses on understanding the role of wisdom and knowledge in economy, work, and leadership. He has published a number of books, including Public Policy in Knowledge-Based Economies, The Handbook on Knowledge Economy, Knowledge Policy, and Wisdom and Management in Knowledge Economy. I request David, sir, to please come on the stage for the opening talk.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. Namaste, everyone. Thank you for coming along this morning. It's important, I think, that we're all here because it's really, I think, what we see as the beginning of a very important and ongoing conversation that we can develop through the centre. And before I get right into it, I also want to just especially thank Surya and Varun and the entire student team that have put this together and have done such a great job. And I think it really speaks to the quality of the students that come into SPJIRM. And so I'm thinking, any HR directors out there, if you're looking to hire someone, you know where to come. Now, I want to also just preface what I'm going to say by stating that I think India could be regarded as the world's greatest net exporter of wisdom. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind today because I want that to be part of this conversation that I just mentioned. And one of the things, I've done a few leadership development programs with Indian executives, and one of the things that I find really disappointing when I talk to them over a coffee during the lunch break is that after I talk to them about Indian philosophy, and they say to me, oh, you know, we just want to be like American CEOs, which is really crushing to my spirit because not even Americans want to be like American CEOs. So the American business model it's crumbling in front of our eyes. And what I don't want to see is a pale imitation of the American model develop in India. I want to see a confident, intellectually confident India stand on its own 2 feet, understand what it's exported to the world in terms of wisdom. You cannot go anywhere on this planet without hearing people talk about yoga, without hearing people talk about mindfulness. It's common practice in the developed world for major corporations to have corporate mindfulness programs. So you don't need to hide away. I mean, I know there's that colonial past and, you know, but in different ways we experience that in Australia as well. But that's the past. It's time to move on. And I think part of today's conversation is about how do we think about what is an authentic Indian model of leadership, of innovation, of management, of business? What does that look like? Because the opportunity is there to do it. The only country in the world that can do it authentically is this one. And I know that in Australia, when we try to replicate the American business model, we do it really badly. It really doesn't work. And I can't see that it would be any better here in India. So I want you to keep that in mind as I go through the presentation. So it's really important, I think, that we're starting this dialogue. And so a dialogue is a conversation between equals, people who respect each other. And so I want us to think about this dialogue between business schools and business as something that's really important for not just for India's future, but for the future of the planet. So the Greek word for flourishing is eudaimonia, and it's kind of in Greek, the opposite word is hedonia. So if you know what a hedonist is, well, a eudaimist is kind of the opposite. So a hedonist just wants to seek self-pleasure, whereas a eudaimist wants to seek the pleasure, I guess, of contributing to making the world a better place. And I think that's what we can do starting today. And I think we can do it if we construct the place for that dialogue to happen. And really the Centre for Wisdom in Leadership and the Institute itself, what we're trying to do is bring people together in that dialogue. We're trying to create the space, and the space here, inside these four walls right now, is the space that we've got to work with today. So let's make it count. Another Greek word is phronesis, and the English translation of that is practical wisdom. And most of the theory about practical wisdom comes to us from Aristotle. And his entire system of philosophy was really about practice. And even though he was one of the greatest logicians who ever lived, and he wrote a lot about rational thought and reasoning, he only wrote about those things because it created the foundation for practical decision-making. And then practical wisdom was then layered on top of that as the basis for doing wise things in practice, in society, in the middle of the mess and hubbub of everyday life, the limited resources, the politics and all of that sort of stuff that gets in the way. So, and traditionally, I guess, those of us who have been schooled in European and particularly Greek philosophy would say, well, wisdom involves excellence. I think everyone agrees about that. It's about some kind of excellence. And for Aristotle, it was virtue. And the word virtue shares the same roots as the word virtuoso, which we associate with music. So a virtuous person can act in society as a virtuoso social practitioner. So that's kind of the groundwork that we're creating. And so you'll see up there that typically we'll say that a wise person who's an excellent practitioner of wisdom.
Sorry, David, if I can interrupt you. If you can come closer to the mic.
Closer? Okay, all right. They have excellent perception. They accurately perceive what's out there in a situation, in reality. They have good judgment, they have sound judgment, which is part logical reasoning, but also experience and insight and creativity and so on. They're good at deliberating. So they pause, they think, they decide. They're adaptable. Situations change. And for Aristotle, what defines wisdom is not an abstract theory of wisdom, but in practice, what defines what wisdom is the situation you're in where you need to practice wisdom. That's the critical factor. So how do you adjust to that situation in a wise way and then respond? And finally, there is ethics, or dharma, if you like. And for Aristotle, of course, that was virtue ethics, which is often also referred to as character ethics. So when we talk about a person being of good character, you're actually echoing Aristotle. And a person of good character is a person who knows how to act in the social world in an exemplary way. They can embody their values, if you like. So what they think is the right thing to do can be translated into the actions that they produce bodily in society. Now, the theory of wisdom that I've developed, which is not really so much a theory, but it's a framework, because it acknowledges the situated nature of wisdom. That is, what defines wisdom is the situation you find yourself in. And I call that social practice wisdom. And it's about how do you develop the appropriate qualities of mind that we need to be a wise practitioner? How do you go about gathering the knowledge, the information, the data, the experience that you need to bring together to deal with the situation that you're facing right now? How do you do that? And I think one of the answers is it won't all be in your head. Only a little bit of it will be in your head. Most of it will be in everyone else's heads and in the relationships between the people in your network. So Indra's web again. And how do you do that in an agile, creative, flexible way so that you can meet the needs of the situation you're in? And then ethics, and in particular virtue, but also care. And what is the role of experience in ethics? And what is the role of aesthetics in ethics? So we know that you've probably heard of the idea of fast and slow thinking. Okay, well, the fast thinking is emotions. The slow thinking is cognition. So your emotions colour every single concrete thought you have ever had in your life and that you will ever have in your life. So emotions are really, really important here. And one of the problems that we all face in trying to be ethical is the role that our emotions play in stopping us from doing the right thing. We worry too much. Oh, what will other people think? And if I do this for that person, then the other person will be upset with me. And those can be really difficult problems to deal with. So how do you get around that? Well, you have to practice doing it. So the Greeks have the term praxis, from which our word practice is derived. And for Aristotle, praxis is about at least trying to do things wisely, at least trying to be virtuous. Because the more often you try, the more likely you are to succeed, and the more likely you are to develop the habits of mind and body that will make wisdom automatic, or at least spontaneous in you as you face each new situation. And then the fifth part is the outcomes. And the broad picture there is human flourishing, or if you're traditional, but today we talk about a flourishing planet, because we're also talking about the great challenges we face with climate change and water security, food security, and all of those sorts of things. And so wisdom really matters, because if we can have that kind of excellence, if we can be that kind of virtuoso in our practice as citizens, but also as managers and as leaders, then we're going to be able to respond better to those challenges that the world is throwing up today. And the challenges that we're beginning to see now are going to have the effect of producing even more novel challenges that we have not even thought about yet. So COVID was one of those, and although epidemiologists have been warning governments for decades now that they need to be prepared for a true pandemic, and virtually every government in the world has ignored them until the pandemic actually happened. And now they've all put in place programs to deal with pandemics when the next one comes along. I think that's a bit unfortunate, because surely we can do better than that. Surely we can. I mean, we elect government leaders into the roles to do this kind of stuff So why aren't we more critical of the people that we vote for? Why aren't we putting pressure on them to do what is needed? And as leaders in our professions, we should be doing the same thing as well. So are our workforces prepared for this uncertain future that we face? I suspect they're not. I don't think even our CEOs are prepared. So if our CEOs are not prepared, how can the rest of the organisation be prepared? They can't. It's a logical impossibility. And so therefore, I think the future of leadership, if it hasn't always been this case, rests on our capacity for wisdom, or in fact, to be wise, to do wise things. That's the really important thing. And I've got to say the same thing about innovation. There's a dark side to innovation as well. Climate change would never have happened without innovation. The internal combustion engine was an innovation, a revolutionary innovation. But look what it's done. So we have to be careful, because I know that much of the literature that's been produced in academia and also in business that has spoken about innovation does not ever acknowledge the dark side of it. The idea is you must have innovation because it's good, and you must do innovation for the sake of innovation. And I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. I guess one of the interesting things that I find as a leadership researcher and as a wisdom researcher is that all the contemporary popular leadership theories can be boiled down to one thing, and that is that they're values-based approaches to leadership. In other words, they're kind of echoes of Aristotle's virtue ethics. And so if Aristotle was around today, he would probably fit in that camp of transformational leadership and spiritual leadership and servant leadership and so on. But if it's values-based, then don't our leaders have to know something about their values? Don't our leaders have to know something about how they translate their values into leadership behaviour and into management behaviour? Now, if I run workshops and I ask CEOs, what are your core values? Do you know what I see in the audience? Head scratching. So it's the kind of work that we haven't been doing. And I don't want to pick on CEOs, because actually if I asked any group of people, what are your core? I ask my students, my undergraduate students, the same question, and they do the same thing too. It's something that we're not used to doing, but we have to start doing it. But also the critical thing is values are always abstract. So if we say generosity is a core value for me, when I talk about generosity, what do I mean? What would that look like in my behaviour? Am I going to give away all my money? Is that what I mean? No, probably not. Am I going to be generous with my time? I can do that. Am I going to be generous with my praise? Yeah, I can do that. What is it for you when you drill down through your values down to concrete social and workplace practice? What does that look like? And that's another question that most of us have not answered. But also, I've got to say that leadership training, as it's done all around the world, inside business schools and in the consulting world, it's not working. It doesn't work. If it did work, because we spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year globally on leadership training, and every country I go to, all I hear is people complaining about poor quality leadership. Whether it's corporate leadership or political leadership, doesn't matter. Even in countries where you're not allowed to complain about leadership, because if you do, you get thrown into jail for the rest of your life, people complain to me about their leaders. So part of our conversation has to be, what do we need to do so that we can do it better? because we have to. There's no choice anymore. We've got to get better at that. Probably you've heard of Nagarjuna and the third way. And what I've done in this table is I've taken Aristotle's framework for the golden mean, which is core to that theory of virtue ethics, and I've kind of force-fit the third way approach into it, because I think it's a great place to start to think about what do we have to do and how do we do it differently, and what is the language we need to use, because we've kind of lost an authentic language to talk about how we practice our leadership, how we practice our management, how we practice our civic duties. And so concepts like non-attachment, ethical conduct, dependent arising, so cause effect that Surya was just talking about, alertness and awareness. I mean, I think we're all sleepwalking through this world at the moment. You know, there's still people out there. In Australia, we face extreme weather conditions all the time, and they're becoming more extreme and extreme more often. And there are still a minority of people walking around fast asleep saying that climate change is not happening as their house sinks under the floodwaters. No, that's not climate change. And as their house sinks under the floodwaters for the third time last year, they're still saying, oh no, that's not climate change. Even though that kind of flooding hasn't happened for 150 years where they live. Insight and understanding, thoughtful and kind speech, right speech in the terms of the Buddha. Corporate speech is not like that. It's mechanistic, it's kind of empty, values-free language. Compassion and empathy, kindness, as the Dalai Lama would say. Where is the kindness in our workplaces? They're often brutal and toxic. Focused attention, mindfulness. It is possible to be a mindful leader. There is even a growing literature that talks about how mindful leaders actually go about doing it. And balanced practice. How many of us can say that we do a balanced leadership practice? I mean, one of the things that I hear from leaders all around the world is, oh yeah, you know, actually I want to do all of this, you know, organisational development and culture development, and we want to do this positive change and blah, blah, blah. But first of all, I've got 100 emails to answer, my phone's ringing, and I've got 3 meetings back to back. And then they get to the end of the day and they go, oh, well, all my meetings and phone calls and emails are being taken care of. I'm going home. And I'm leaving all of the big picture stuff that might tidy up my organisation for tomorrow. And guess what happens when they get into work tomorrow? I've got 3 meetings back to back. I've got 100 phone call messages. I've got 100 emails that have come in overnight, and I've just got to get them done first. That's what happens. So what we've got to get good at doing is, if we're going to say leadership requires us to be virtuosos, to be virtuous people, excellent practitioners of leadership, we've got to get way better at turning our values into action. We all have values, even if we struggle to name them. We all have them. But have we developed the appropriate habits of mind and body that will enable us to practice it, to do wisdom? Have we got the coaching framework that will help us to develop those things? Can we be guided by other kinds of skillful and knowledgeable experts? Are we practicing intentional wisdom or intentional virtue? Do we even know what our intentions are? Have we defined what our intentions are? Our good intentions. And remember the saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's something we have to get better at as well. Because according to Aristotle, the virtuous person, the virtuoso leader, the wise leader, knows how to do the right thing, knows that they're doing it for the right reason, knows that they're doing it in the right way, at the right time or with the right timing, and they know that they're going to get the right outcome. That's a very high bar to set, but it's a bar, you know, when you get into a leadership position, the bar is high. You have to accept that. It's like, I was going to say opening the batting for Australia, but I should say probably opening the batting for India after the last couple of test matches. You expect it to be hard. Because it is hard. It's the top. This is where excellence happens, and excellence is hard. It's challenging, but you have to rise to the occasion. And I don't think we do that well enough. I'm running out of time here, I think, Surya, aren't I? Got just a few minutes left. Sorry, Varun, I'm going to skip through innovation a bit quickly. So we've, as I mentioned before, we've also fallen into the trap of thinking innovation is and of itself a good thing. And, you know, the metaphor I like to think of, and I'm sorry, this is a bit of a first world metaphor, but is high definition colour televisions. And consumer electronics companies invest a lot of money in making us better high definition colour TVs. And we're all going to go and buy one. That's for sure. They're going to make money out of doing that. But my question to you, last time you bought a new high definition colour TV, did it really make you a better person? Did it make your life better? Did it make the world a better place? And I can guarantee if you think about it, you'll think, well, actually it didn't make any difference at all. And I think in a sense, in industrial innovation, we're kind of inventing better colour TVs all the time, which in the end, who cares? So what is a new model, a wiser model of innovation? Because as I said, also the internal combustion engine was a revolutionary innovation, but look where it's ended up. So we need to get better at that. And it threatens that idea of a flourishing planet. What do we do? What are we going to do? What do we have to do now? And again, if we say, as we do innovation, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing it for the right reason? Are we doing it in the right way? Are we doing it at the right time? You know, if we're inventing things that will reduce carbon emissions today, why weren't we doing it 25 years ago when we actually needed to do it? And are we getting the right outcomes? So insight and creativity have always been thought to be core aspects of innovation, but I'm going to add to that and say we need ethical insight. We need virtuous innovation. We need to think about the planet. We need to also think about people's stories, people on this planet. What are their stories? And what do their stories tell us about what they actually need? And 80% of people on this planet will not tell you they need a new colour television. Only a few of us want that, those of us who are wealthy. And in developed economies, what we're seeing is a special kind of innovation that's needed. Business model innovation, not technological innovation. And if you look at the World Intellectual Property Organisation's report from last year, they're talking about human capital innovation, social innovation, cultural innovation as the new frontline for innovation. And if you're looking at things like social enterprises, for example, the most critical thing in setting up a social enterprise is an innovative business model. That's the first thing. And if you haven't got that, you won't go anywhere. Now, you might layer on top of that some technological innovation, but you need the business model innovation first. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of slides that I want you to think about for the rest of the day and as we enter into the dialogue that I was talking about at the start. So what is your organisation's value add for your children and your grandchildren's future? What is that? What does it look like? Can we measure it? What is your definition of value, and is it relevant anymore? Because the days where value is only measured in economic terms are gone. That's ancient history now. We can't afford to do that. Do your values hit the ground or stay in the clouds as an individual and as leadership teams? Do your values hit the ground and do something virtuous? Is your organisation strong on character or on virtue? Can you develop wisdom in your organisation, or do you need help? Do you need people like myself and Monica Ardelt and Howard and so on to assist? Because I can tell you, all of those people, they're all my friends, all those wisdom researchers, I know them personally. And if you tell me you need help from them, I just need to send them an email and they'll help. And that's part of why the centre is here. And a second order lot of things to think about. Do you feel ready enough for this uncertain future that requires wisdom? Is your organisational culture right? Are your innovations part of the problem or part of the solution? Do you know what you are responsible for taking the lead on and creating a flourishing planet? That's important. We talk about corporate social responsibility. So we need to think, what things do I need to take responsibility for? Is your organisation positioned to address the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? Because there's this massive framework out there that's very, very practical that you could implement in your organisation tomorrow if you know they exist. And did you also know that there's ISO 26000, which is a global standard to help organisations understand exactly how to operationalise their CSR programs to mesh perfectly with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm repeating myself here. So today really is the first day of an ongoing dialogue. I hope we continue. And it's about us creating a vision and rethinking and I guess repurposing ourselves. Because we have to each ask ourselves, what am I going to do that's virtuous? How am I going to be a virtuoso in this global scenario? And you know, India fits in a very dominant position in that global landscape now. India is not a colony anymore. India stands on its own 2 feet. It's an economic powerhouse, and it's got to accept some of the responsibilities that come with being a G20 level country. In fact, all G20 level countries should be taking far more responsibility. Even Australia, we've really struggled with, not necessarily with the current government, but the previous government we had. We're quite adamant about shirking their responsibilities or our responsibilities as a country. I will leave it there, and I don't actually know if we've got time for questions and discussion, but if we do. We do, okay. I think the lack of vision, and also look, one of the really important things in wisdom is courage, and we never really talk about it because it's seen as a gendered thing, and men are courageous, and so that leaves women out. But women can be courageous too, in my book. And it's having the courage. Like a lot of leaders, I think, have the kind of insights that I have and the kind of ambitions for the world that I have, but they don't have the courage to do it because they're afraid. Oh, well, what will the shareholders say? And what will my friends who are CEOs on other companies say? And what will the board of directors say? They'll think I'm crazy. They'll think I'm a weirdo. They'll think I'm a hippie or whatever it is. But what I'm going to say about that is, who cares? If it's the right thing to do, then you should do it. And if people criticise you for it, then okay, fine. I'll accept that criticism. But at least I know that I'm doing the right thing and I'm doing it for the right reason and hopefully in the right way. So there's a very normative framework that kind of sits like an iron cage around business and the way we do business and the way we think and the way we speak. And so I think even the language is wrong. But the language won't change unless we change our own language. And so we may not be able to change a whole organisation or a whole industry or a whole economy, but we can change ourselves. And I think, looking at this audience, I think we are all on the same, more or less on the same wavelength here. And if all of us were going out and speaking with the kind of language that we would most like to speak in the corporate world, then other people will look at us, and particularly people who look up to us will say, well, here's a high status person saying these things, so it must be okay for us to say it too, because we're thinking the same thing. And so you build that critical mass in the net. So this is Indra's web again. And if you're in the center of one of those webs, then whatever you say, other people will pick up on. And in leadership roles, people are watching you because they want to copy you. So give them something good to copy, including the language that you use. Snehal.
Yes, David, in the context of this war capitalism, where people are talking about this freedom of thinking, freedom of mind, there's this whole notion that's going on, which is, for lack of a better word, I call it purpose washing. So in that sense, whitewashing, purple, greenwashing, you name it.
Yeah.
How does one, as a leader or a corporation, prevent that from happening? Because otherwise, what you are trying to put in the first place, if it is seen as or perceived to be purpose washing, it could just be meant there are other outcomes. I want to attract young talent and all of that, which is a diluted purpose, which is misconstrued, whereas you're trying to bring about something more intentional and more specific.
Well, that's a leadership failure. So that's a leader who's not virtuous, or a leadership group that's not virtuous. So a virtuous person isn't superficial about things like that. So greenwashing, purpose washing, sport washing is the latest thing with the World Cup soccer. We see it all around. So a virtuous leader would not tolerate doing things superficially that are really essentially just public relations exercises. And one of the things that's coming through in the corporate social responsibility leadership, corporate social responsibility practice literature is that organisations who outsource their CSR do a really bad job of it. It has a really negative effect on their bottom line. But organisations who do the CSR activities themselves, so employees and executives in that organisation actually go out into the field, into the communities where they're trying to make a difference and do stuff themselves. As we say in Australia, they go out and get their hands dirty. That's buying into it authentically. And so organisations that just want to greenwash or whatever, it's not an authentic approach to it. It's not going to make the world a better place. People will see through it. And of course, that's how come it gets in the media, because people see through it immediately. So your bottom line is going to suffer. We know that. We see that in the research literature over and over and over again. But the other side of it, I spoke to a friend of mine who's general manager of Konica Minolta in Australia, and he's very famous in Australia for his CSR program, and he's just a fabulous role model, Dr. David Cook. And he said to me, you know, at some level, when I see organisations doing this kind of fake responsibility stuff, I don't mind it too much, because sometimes it's a fake it until you make it scenario. And we see that sometimes, even if they're not genuine in their intention to begin with, through the course of time, the pressure from within, from the bottom of the organisation coming up, and the pressure coming from consumer activists and even ethical investment funds and so on, to actually get it right and get it authentic, just grows and grows and grows until they eventually give up and say, okay, we're going to do it for real.
Thank you, David. A lot of things to think about.
Yeah,
so really
a
appreciate
bit
that.
too much, I think.
It's very, very useful. Thank you. One thing I'm curious about, when you spoke about the social practice wisdom, where would you place the ability to discern, systemic structures, figuring out the web, if you like?
Yeah. So part of that is, I think, in a very complex world where we're almost networked to death, I think a big part of that is to have the equanimity of mind, the mindfulness, the ability to sit and still the mind so that you can actually see the landscape in front of you, see the network, and understand what's real network and what's kind of just illusion. So there's a clarity of thinking that you need to get first of all. The second thing is then, once you see what that network is, what do you know about it? Or what can you say about it? What can you foretell about what it's capable of doing for you, for your organisation, for the world? And the third thing then is to say, okay, if that's my network and these are the things that it can do, then go back to those 5 virtue ethics questions about doing the right thing for the right reason, the right way, the right time, the right outcome. Ask those questions again, and then put it into practice. Learn from your mistakes. Someone once said that, probably one of the wisest things ever said, that to be wise, first of all, you must be unwise. So wisdom is built on mistake after mistake after mistake, but mistakes that you learn from. And that's really important. And that's another part of the courage. We have to have the courage to fail. And I know that's part of the innovation literature as well, that you have to have the courage to go out and innovate and create things that might not work in the marketplace. So yeah, I think that's important. But courage again, courage and mindfulness.
David, thank you for an excellent talk. Because I'm new to this and you know the literature really well, where I was struggling from was about how do you unpack it and repack it and rethink what wisdom research was? Because as I was following your talk, you talked a lot about wisdom research almost being like a praxis for social good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You brought in mindfulness, you brought in kindness, you brought in corporate social responsibility. A lot of these areas people have been looking at. You talked about fast thinking, slow thinking. People have looked at that. Things like single loop learning, double loop learning, and so on. And so my question is actually also interrelated with coming from London, where in my own university sector, you have lots of leaders, but who come from very, very different faith traditions, as well as this year you might have heard that Britain Christianity has become a minority religion, not a majority, it's a minority.
Yeah.
And atheism has spread a lot.
Yes.
So in a way, what I'm trying to say is everything that you talked about, including social capital, cultural capital, human capital, a lot of literature written about that. But where do you think wisdom research can actually provide something over and above what we're already exploring within business and management research? But also because you said that wisdom research is situated, and so I'm thinking about contexts such as London or increasingly many cities around the world where you've got lots and lots of faith communities and bringing them together, not just from an Indian perspective, but from a more holistic perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the critical thing in wisdom is integration. And I actually, a couple of years back, I sat down and I thought, I'm going to see what the social science literature says about integration. And actually it says nothing, or almost nothing. And really, if you look at what Aristotle is saying, but if you look at any of the great wisdom traditions, they're all saying the same thing, that wisdom is situated. If we just think about wisdom at a mundane level of living, and they're all saying that, okay, when you face a situation, you have to look and see what are, in a sense, the wisdom resources I need to deal with this situation. What's the knowledge? What's the information? What are the kind of mindsets I need? All of those sorts of things. What are the ethical considerations? And then how do I integrate all of that? How do I integrate that into something that I can communicate? And how do I integrate that into something that can turn into a practice that turns into the sorts of outcomes that I want? And because it's situated, then the way it looks in London, how we might define what a wise response to COVID is in London compared to where I live in a little place called Marucci River. I live on, almost on the top of a little mountain in a little cabin. So how we might respond to a pandemic on my little mountain is a different kind of situation. And in both scenarios, we're going to pull together different kinds of wisdom resources, and we're going to have to find a particular way of integrating them in a form that we can make a decision, then integrate that with a way of communicating it, and then integrate again so that we can actually do what we've said we ought to do. And I think it's that integration process that's the critical thing, because the CSR scholars will tell you how to do CSR, the cognitive scientists will tell you how to think, but nobody's pulling it all together and putting it into a great big bundle that says, okay, if we take again, the knowledge exists, all the leadership problems that the world faces, the knowledge exists in the research literature that tells you all you need to know about leadership. But the problem is, how do you pull that together? Then integrate it. Well, first of all, how do you even know it's there? That's the first thing. Then you pull it together, you integrate it, you get this assimilation or this synthesis that's designed to meet the needs of the situation. And I think that's the critical thing. Knowledge has always existed, but our challenge has been, what do we do with it? And typically we're not actually all that good at pulling it together, because we do have a natural propensity for siloing, for not really seeing beyond the end of our own nose. And And that might have been fine 200 years ago, but it's not fine in the 21st century. So we really need to develop that integrative capacity and then convert that into the communication capacity and then into the doing capacity. Yeah.
So one last question.
There are a lot of innovation going on around artificial intelligence, chatbots, multiple things. Can they partially replace wisdom?
That's a great question. I've been thinking about that a lot. I've been playing with ChatGPT quite a bit recently. I think that no, I don't think it can. You know, artificial intelligence is based on following rules, and it's based on being trained on specific data sets. And so if you have a problem for which we don't have rules to deal with, and if we have a problem that we don't have a data set to describe, then our fallback option has to be a profoundly human one, and hopefully that would be wisdom or something approaching it. So I have to say I'm incredibly impressed by ChatGPT. I've played with it, and it's mind-bogglingly good. It does make mistakes, that's for sure, but it terrifies me at the same time as it excites me. So, no, I mean, we think about, or people have been thinking about, well, what professions will artificial intelligence replace? And you'll be surprised at some of them. So a lot of doctors will lose their jobs. The doctors who deal with diagnosing routine illnesses, we probably won't need them in 20 years' time, because the research so far indicates that artificial intelligence does a way better job than a general practitioner does at diagnosing illness. But will we still need surgeons or specialist doctors who deal with non-routine illnesses? Yes, we will. There are now artificial intelligence chatbots out there. If you get in trouble with the law, and let's say you want to get off a parking ticket, and you can go to the chatbot and say, how do I write a letter that will get me off my parking ticket? And it will write it for you, and it probably will persuade the judge or the lawyer or the police or whoever it goes to that you didn't deserve that parking fine. So but again, that's routine legal issues that it would probably be better than most lawyers at dealing with. Accounting is already a dying profession in most countries. Artificial intelligence is going to do your income tax way better than your accountant will do it, or way better than you will do it if you do it yourself. But ultimately, there's that non-routine, there's that unpredictableness about the world that I spoke about right at the beginning, that's really brought about by the sorts of global challenges we face. That means that we still need human minds that can deal with those sorts of things. So I don't know what's going to happen in 5 and 10 years' time in relation to artificial intelligence, but what I've seen so far, because I'm director of an educational technology company, and ChatGPT has presented some major challenges to our business model, and so I've needed to get in there and look really closely at what it can do. And universities and the education systems are now saying, how are we going to catch students who ask ChatGPT to write their assignments? Because it's really good at writing assignments. It's really bad at putting referencing in, really, really bad at that. And people have already begun to develop tools for assessing whether an assignment has been written by a human or by artificial intelligence. But do you know what? All you have to do to beat those tools is tell the AI chatbot what the parameters are you need for it to write under so that it beats the cheat detection technology. So if you know a little bit about quantitative linguistics, you'll know that you could guess that if the cheat detection software are measuring two key things. One is called burstiness, which is a technical thing, a statistical thing where things kind of pop out kind of almost unexpectedly because we're not perfectly rational, and complexity. So we tend to, as humans, over-complexify things. So if you tell the chatbot to rewrite your essay so that it has a sufficient level of burstiness and perplexity about it, then it will. And then you can feed that through the cheat detection artificial intelligence, and it'll tell you that 100% it was written by a human. Believe me, I've tested it myself. We're done. Thank you. So thank you very much, everybody. And we'll talk more this afternoon.